Recently, I was in the gym all sweaty when this man walks up to me and he asked, "Is windsurfing all you do?" Normally, I counter this question and say, "No, I'm a student." But who am I kidding, really? It's been 2.5 years since I earned my bachelor's degree, and since then, I've been on at least 30 trips. They all involved windsurfing. So I smile and say that indeed, I am a professional windsurfer. And I can't lie, it's my biggest passion. Windsurfing is such a challenging sport and gives me an adrenaline rush that keeps me coming back for more. But I let you in on a secret though. I wish traveling with windsurfing would be easier. On social media, I make it look like this. But behind the scenes, it's a bit more of a hassle. Nonetheless, I feel very grateful for this opportunity I have of traveling the world doing something that I love. What if it takes a village to raise a Sarah-Quita? Actually, there is no what if to my story. It took a village. You can ask my mom all about it. But I'd like to think that I was raised in several villages. Each of these villages provided me with people and situations that taught me valuable lessons that I could take on my journey to become the professional windsurfer I am today. In my talk, I'd like to illustrate that you need to put in the effort to make your dreams happen, but you also need the right people around you to support you and make your dreams happen. Metaphorically speaking, I was raised in 3 villages. I grew up in Aruba, then I moved to Holland to pursue my studies, and in between Aruba and Holland, I traveled a lot for windsurfing. In that sense, the world and the international people I met were the 3rd village. Let's take a look at these villages, and I'll explain what each of them taught me. In Aruba, the foundation was laid for my windsurfing and academic career. My parents were the ones that got me into the sport, and the environment at the fishermen's huts was perfect for me to excel at my sport. First and foremost, my parents brought my brother and I to the beach one day to practice this new water sport. Unlike my brother, who took to windsurfing immediately, I couldn't lift my sail when I was 9 years old. So I decided to quit. A year later, however, my parents challenged me to try the sport again. They entered me at the Bonaire Regatta, which meant I had 4 months to practice. I had so much fun at this event in Bonaire and fell in love with windsurfing. Now, 16 years later, windsurfing has taken me on amazing adventures. So I'm very grateful to my parents for giving me that extra nudge when I needed it. Besides my parents, the environment at the fishermen's huts was perfect for me to learn to windsurf. It's windy practically all year long, and the water is very shallow, so it's very kid-friendly. I also joined the Wind Racers Club Aruba, and with a big group of kids, we travel all around the island to different spots to train together. It always revolved around having fun. Then there were the locals that always were willing to give us a helping hand, but would challenge us at the same time. If I broke anything, I was always welcome at the centers to get it fixed. That way I could get on the water as soon as possible. But when I come back to the beach and told them that I landed a new trick, they didn't allow me to bask in the glory. They immediately challenged me to try something more complex. They definitely kept me busy, but they were also the ones that always pushed me to do better. As much as my parents supported my brother and I in our activities, school always came first. If we didn't finish our homework, we were not allowed to go to the beach. And believe me, that was a serious threat. But soon I learned that studies and sports were complementary to each other. After a session on the water, it would ease my mind so that later on I could get into homework quicker. And because I practiced several sports, I developed this discipline to plan my studies ahead so I'd be on time for practice. Oops. Once I finished high school, it came natural to me when I moved to Holland to want to combine my studies with windsurfing. Lastly, growing up on Aruba, I have this open and welcoming mindset. Since we host so many tourists, I'm comfortable making small talk with unknown people. And having grown up multilingual on this island, I can actually do this in 3 to 4 different languages. Having this open mindset and ability to communicate later on made traveling and meeting new people that much easier for me. So in Aruba, the foundation was laid. I moved to Holland to pursue science and innovation management. As you can imagine, moving from a laid-back Caribbean island to a busy European country was a huge culture shock. And that wasn't just because my laundry wasn't being done for me anymore. In Holland, I had to become more independent. I had to value time and organize myself. I figured out what I really wanted to do, and I started to appreciate the little things more. As a first-time student in Holland, there were the basic things I learned, like cooking, cleaning, speaking up for myself, and planning ahead for bad weather. But the one thing I really started to value was time. Because unlike in Aruba, in Holland, time is limited. Because you need to travel so long, there's only so much you can do in a day. I very quickly learned that being on time and using my time effectively was very important. In Holland, windsurfing wasn't accessible to me like it was back home in Aruba. I didn't have transportation to the beach, neither did I have a place to store my gear. And because I have so much gear, I don't like bothering people with it. But in my time there, I've learned that people are willing to help. I just needed to ask. Soon I met a lady that allowed me to store my gear in her shed. There were Dutch sailors that would pick me up at the station and take me to the beach. I even had friends who received my whole new shipment of gear at their house when I wasn't even in the country. And every time I had to travel out, I would rent a car, grab my gear I would rent my car, pick my gear up at this lady's house, drop it at the airport, and fortunately there was always someone that would help me drag my gear through the airport. Being able to depend on these friends to cover my basic needs for windsurfing, I was able to focus on the things that were actually important, like planning my trips, for example. Which brings me to the part where I started traveling out of necessity and fell in love with it. In Aruba, I never needed to escape winter for obvious reasons. But in Holland, I found myself one day sailing in 5 degrees, not able to feel my hands anymore. I quickly grasped this concept. Very soon, I learned the exact dates I had between my semesters, and I'd study as hard as I could so I wouldn't have to retake any exams in that time. That way, I could fly out to the windiest and warmest places. I went to Cape Town, Canary Islands, Egypt, Brazil, you name it. And it was the first time I started traveling to a place of my own choice and not just for competition. And that's when I realized that that's what I wanted to do. Studying and traveling became my drive to study as hard as I could so I could travel out as soon as I could. Having said that, I needed to get organized. I had to book my own tickets, plan ahead when I would take my gear to the airport, and as well find accommodation. Of course, I made the necessary mistakes, and I flew out without finding accommodation, thinking that would magically be arranged like when I used to travel with my parents. It didn't. And I've ended up sleeping on the floor more than a couple of times. But I think I have it under control now. Finally, in Holland, it taught me to appreciate things more. For example, when the sun would come out after it's been hiding for weeks. I even started to appreciate the gray days because at least it wasn't raining. Studying and living in Holland, to me, was an invaluable experience. Moving on to the third village, I started competing and traveling at a very young age. It has broadened my mind to different ways of thinking and opened my eyes to the beauty of this world. I've learned that capabilities matter most, that if I wanted to move forward, I needed to challenge myself. Also that I could never put myself ahead of anybody else, and to think in solutions. When I was 11, I saw professional windsurfers for the first time in Bonaire. After watching them perform in the water, I remember thinking to myself that I wanted to do that too. A year later, the professional tour returned to Bonaire, and they allowed me to compete with the big girls. I was 12 at the time. They allowed me to compete even though they thought I was too young. Honestly, I didn't even know my age was being discussed. And as far as I knew, my gear was supposed to feel that heavy. I finished 5th at this event. Very soon, I met my first sponsors, and I started competing internationally. At 15 years old, I won my first World Cup in freestyle. Later on, at 17, I won my first freestyle world title. Looking back now, I wonder what my parents were thinking, letting me compete against women twice my age. Because of course, at 14, 15, I thought I was pretty grown up. I never paid attention to our age differences. I only saw what these women were capable of doing on the water, and that's how I measured myself against them. I think capabilities is all that matters. Having won the freestyle world title, I started looking for more challenges. Competing on this professional tour, I'm surrounded by people that are the best in the world at their craft. Can you imagine the accumulated knowledge I had access to? I could learn so much just by asking questions and watching. I naturally progressed into slalom sailing because you perform this on flat water. At first, I made a lot of mistakes, and I was very inconsistent in my races. Luckily, the riders were always willing to give me advice. With this advice and putting the practice into this discipline, I figured I had a knack for this too. And now I have 3 slalom world titles under my belt. To further challenge myself, I moved into wave sailing 3 years ago. This progression is not going as naturally as I thought I hoped. Fear plays a much bigger role in this discipline. Because you jump that much higher, the crashes hurt that much more. And since I come from a flat water island, any wave bigger than knee-high used to frighten me. And when you're being held down by a wave, it's not that easy to find your Zen mode. I had to start from scratch with this discipline, and that is very humbling. But there's no better feeling than being afraid of something, doing it anyway, and coming out alive and even thriving. Challenging myself was fun. Competing on tour, I've traveled a lot with people from all the corners of the earth. I've learned that we're all completely different, but we all have something special to bring to the table. Having challenged myself in different disciplines and traveled with international people taught me that I can never put myself above anybody else because there's always something new we can learn from each other. Think in solutions. My brother taught me my first lesson. When I was 18, I had to travel from the Canary Islands back to Aruba all by myself for the first time. Can you believe I misread my departure time? When we arrived at the airport, I see the check-in lady packing up her stuff and walking off. I recognized my mistake immediately and started crying, because to me, that was the end of the world. I just missed my flight. And as I'm crying, my brother runs off. So I'm thinking, great, he's mad at me. Minutes later, he comes back and hands me a ticket. While I was dwelling on the problem, he had already found a solution. He bought me a new flight so I would make it to Amsterdam in time to catch my connecting flight to Aruba. Think in solutions, there's never a problem. During my windsurfing career, I've received so much support from family and friends, and especially the Aruban community. Being an athlete, I have my own drive and motivation to do better, but knowing that these people also support me is a huge motivation as well. And this ongoing support, to me, is what sustainable cities and communities are all about. All in all, each of these villages taught me lessons that I could take with me on my journey. But the first village was Aruba. And every time I step on the podium and I hear the national anthem, Chiquito y simple boporta, pero toch si respeta, which directly translates into, you may be small and simple, but you are very well respected, I fill with joy and realize that I couldn't have had a better first village to grow up in. We may be a small island, but we have a lot of talent. And because we're such a tight-knit community, we can make things happen. So let's keep raising champions. Thank you.